Hello guys, and welcome back to another video. World of Warcraft Shadowlands has been out now for a little while, and one of the most important decisions you'll make with your character is which covenant to choose. Now, a lot of people are making this decision based on their covenant ability. However, basing the decision on this doesn't necessarily fit their class with the aesthetic of the covenant, the aesthetic of the zone itself. I'm here today to tell you that every single class fits with every single covenant, and today we're going to be focusing on the mage. So without further ado, let's get started. First of all, a little background on the mages, and this is my cheap answer to alleviate your fears or discomfort within a covenant, because I think that when you look back at the history of your character or the history of mages within Azeroth, they are generally either neutral or they get to pick their side. During the Legion expansion, your order hall is arrayed around you becoming kind of a semi-guardian of Azeroth. Now, the guardians in ages past, in the lore, in the history, have been the guardians of Azeroth. Now, there was a guardian called Aegwynn who faced Sargeras far before we ever did, the shade of Sargeras at least. And Aegwynn had this immense power imbued into her, and she became the guardian after a long line of guardians and passed this on to Medivh, where the line essentially ended. I mention this because I think this is important, because I think to a lot of the covenants, this is who the mage is. It's a beacon, a guardian, it's a person to lead the people of the Shadowlands through the issues and the conflict that is assaulting the Shadowlands currently. Now, that is a cheap answer. I think that kind of thinking can make you quite comfortable within any covenant. I am going to focus on this video more specifically and do a little bit of a deeper dive. Bastion is the covenant that I'm going to start with. I think if you look into the Bastion covenant storyline, at least the story of the Kyrians, you get this sense that there's unrest within the ranks. The campaign, without giving spoilers away, focuses on the way of the Kyrian. Upon becoming these winged big blue boys, they have no choice but to let their past go, their lives go. They have to part with their memories and serve, essentially, and lose a lot of what made them who they were for a cause that, at least to the Kyrians, is higher than that. And part of the conflict within Bastion currently is the Forsworn faction who rebel against this. And to me, at least, the mage joining this covenant is the guide, to guide them on the path to find a new way, to do the things that the Kyrian need to do without taking away who they are, without essentially taking the choice from them. The wizard or the mage that I conflate this idea with most is Gandalf, the knowledgeable wizard, the one that shows the way and shows the path. And I think looking at the covenant ability, Radiant Spark, for example, it reminds me of those wizards of old in any medium that you see, whether it's Dumbledore fighting Voldemort or whether it is Gandalf facing the Nazgul. They're powerful. And the Radiant Spark ability for Bastion essentially increases in power depending on how many spells you cast. I imagine it as this kind of flurry of magic. You use Radiant Spark, you're bursting with this primal energy in an amalgamation of fire and frost and arcane, hammering the enemy, unleashing the spells in a form more powerful than another mage might be even capable of. Radiant Spark wreaths the enemy in this blue light, almost like you're suspending them, and then you volley the primal magics that are at your disposal that you can cast at a moment's notice through your very fingertips. Ardenweald links quite nicely with what I've just said about Bastion. I think some people can look at a mage joining Ardenweald and think, well, you're just a glorified druid, aren't you, really? Well, sure, maybe. But I see that as more of a nurturing role. It's the guide, but the guide that has the empathy and the compassion to see the forests of Ardenweald and want to nurture that and keep that safe, wants to preserve that. I think as a mage, you stand side by side with beings like Ursok and the wild gods and the lower. Ardenweald is the one place that those figures, those beings go to when they die. And it's a very important job that the Night Fae have, and as a mage you'd sense that. You'd see the presences, the strength in the wild seeds of Ardenweald, and you'd want to preserve that to help in the fight against the enemies of the Shadowlands, and not just the enemies of the Shadowlands, but the worlds that need those spirits to come out of this alive in order to survive and fight the forces of evil on whatever planet or world that might need them. I think moving specifically onto the Covenant ability, shifting power, you're drawing the energy from your surroundings, from the ground beneath. The ability itself reduces the cooldowns. Again, it's this onslaught of magic, this idea of the battle mage, the defender of the forest, harnessing the forest around them to protect those that the mage sees as so important. This idea that Ardenweald's magic is more druidic. I think the mage is someone who seeks out knowledge, someone who sees all forms of magic. You see that in their specializations. They specialize in fire, frost, and arcane. Why not more? I think if you're the kind of mage that is seeking knowledge, that wants to root out knowledge, that wants to become not necessarily more powerful, but wants to increase the breadth of their magic, it makes you a more powerful, more interesting mage. Shifting power seems like a conduit between the mage and Ardenweald, in the same way that I think a lot of media focuses on when they talk about mages. You'll read a story or watch a film or a TV show, or even in Azeroth, there are items of power, whether it's a ring, whether it's a necklace, whether it's a gem. And it kind of acts as a conduit between the mage and another source of power. And Ardenweald is that power. And shifting power, the ability that you gain, is the conduit for that. It's an imbuement of power that gives you something more, another weapon with which to protect and fight. Revendreth is the third covenant I'm going to focus on in regard to the mage. Now, the Venther are a really interesting covenant. I think deep in the coffers of the Venther, you sense secrets, you sense power, you sense knowledge. Behind the gleam in the mischievous Venther's eyes, you sense opportunity and seek the deep magics coursing through the zone. Drawing on Mirrors of Torment, which is the covenant ability for the mage in Revendreth, it works by casting a spell on the enemy. You cast 3 mirrors and use their power against them. It reeks of mischief and cleverness and being one step ahead, almost using your magic as a chess piece to defeat your enemy, while flinging your fire, your frost, your arcane magic. You also use the magic imbued into you through the Venther Covenant to use their own magic against them, to stop them, to silence them, to do more damage to them. I think this speaks to a very calculating mage, a mage that's come through the various wars of Azeroth, come to the Shadowlands and survived, and not only survived but thrived. You're the mage that thinks of what your enemy's thinking just before they think it, and you are one step ahead at all times, which I think makes you a better mage, a mage to be feared, because any plan that the enemy might come up with, they know that you've already thought of that and you've got 2 plans in place to counter that. And not only those 2 plans, but you've got more to hit them with. And you've got to think the Venther plot and scheme like it's a game. Whether you're clever or have some agenda more devious in mind, whether your mage is, to your mind, a little bit mischievous, or whether they are a purer character, I think this fits quite nicely within either. You can see it as being this mage that's 20 steps ahead of everyone at once, or you can see it as your mage is this plotting, manipulative, clever being that draws on the mirrors, draws on the magic of Revendreth to get the job done. Maldraxis is the last covenant that I'm going to focus on. Now, it's really interesting to look at Maldraxis because the ability that you get is called Deathborn. It's almost the fantasy of you becoming a lich. The aesthetic of the armor, for example, the helm gives you green eyes. Deathborn itself turns you into one of the Maldraxi, this hooded skeleton that's imbued with magic. When you take on that form, when you transform into this Deathborn, you become more powerful. And you can look at this one of 2 ways. Again, depending on how you see your mage, how you see that character, you could see yourself as someone taking the power to stop an enemy. You're going so far to stop those that are attacking your friends that it not only consumes you, it transforms you. You could see it, for example, as almost like an Anakin Skywalker to Vader, or an Arthas to the Lich King. Perhaps not quite so far, but at the end of the day, to do what they thought needed to be done, whether you think they're right or not, they changed. They took on new power to not only give themselves and imbue themselves with more, but they physically became something else. You could see your character as something of a martyr in the face of the jailer and his forces. Or you could quite simply take the route of Kel'Thuzad, who drew from the powers of death and became a lich in physical form and gave himself entirely to the throes of power. I think it can go either way. I think Deathborn lends itself to the honourable mage and also the dishonourable one. I think regardless of what your goal is, your means of reaching that goal is to reach for power to such an extent you'll take the ultimate step to become something else. Or maybe you just really love Draco and you figure she's been around these guys for so long, that's what she fancies. Fair play to you as well. And with that, thank you very much for watching, and I hope this video has gone at least a little bit of the way towards making the Covenant of your choice feel a little bit more like home. Thank you again, and I will see you next time.